Good morning, everyone. And on behalf of the Parent Resource Center, I want to welcome you to our webinar, Maximizing Student Independence. My name is Lisa Millman, and I am a specialist at the Parent Resource Center. I want to welcome Janine Waddell and Lori Creighton from Behavioral Intervention Services. They are presenting today, Minimizing Prompts and Maximizing Your Child's Independence. Welcome, Janine and Lori.
Thanks so much, Lisa and the Parent Resource Center. We are extremely excited to be here with everyone today. Good morning, and thanks for having us. We will be talking about minimizing those prompts and maximizing student independence. We are so glad you guys are going to spend a little bit of your morning with us. So the presentation was created to address both the needs of older students and younger students, and of course students of varying abilities. We know you know your student best, and I invite you to connect the material that we talk about this morning to the specific and unique needs of your learner. So thank you for joining us this morning. So getting into what we're going to talk about today, we're going to be providing an overview of prompting and self-monitoring. We're also going to review general strategies to increase our student independence with specific tasks such as completing homework or even doing chores. We want everyone to be able to walk away with being able to support prompting and being able to learn about prompt fading and work towards our students towards self-monitoring techniques and being able to help support our students with independence. We know independence is something that we always want to work towards and that we always want to help support with our students. So when we're thinking about behavior change, we always want to think first about it being something proactive. We want to think about our time. We want it to be as positive as possible for our students as well as for ourselves. And we want to talk about consistency and skill development. So as we go through this behavior change journey together, we want to remember that this behavior change process does take time and strategies are different for each learner. We want to approach behavior change in a positive way. One of the simplest ways we can do this is to catch our student when they're doing what is expected or desired. Sharing with our student why what they're doing is cool or amazing, wonderful, helpful. And consistency. Consistency is also important. Consistency does not mean 100% perfect. It just means that even when it's hard to do, we just want to try our best. And again, skill development. We want to remember that behaviors are skills that can be taught, just like math or reading. And we do this through teaching and providing our student with feedback. So this is going to be a poll that we're going to do now. I want to do a little check-in and see how you guys are all doing this morning. If everybody had their coffee and everybody's ready to start their day. And just want to do a check-in with you. When it comes to my students' independence, I feel, number one, oh, well, sort of like whatever. Number two, really? Number three, I could cry. Or number four, I just can't do this. So here's our poll that has come up on your screen, and I want you to click on number one, number two, number three, or number four. As you're going through those polls are going to come in. Seeing those numbers come through. I'm loving you guys are active and on it this morning. Look at those responses coming through. So far, let's see what we have. We'll show our responses, and looking at your screen, it looks like the majority of us are at really, which maybe looks like we have these expectations for our students to be independent, but maybe they're not reaching our expectations. We have one that's, oh well. We have 5 that I could cry. And we're showing 4 that just, I can't. So for each response that we're seeing on the screen, numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, we're going to address that today. And what we want to be able to do is make this behavior change journey as easy as possible for us, as well as our students, and being able to work towards that independence and start to be those behavior detectives and find out, why is my response really? What is it my student's doing that maybe we can change? Sometimes also we have to change our own behavior too in this process. So thank you for your responses. I love those polls because it's a great way to start us off to see where we're all feeling this morning. So throughout this training, we're going to be sharing strategies for prompting. We're going to talk about prompt fading and self-monitoring that's going to lead our students to independence. Our executive function skills are a big part of this process. We're going to dive deeper into goal-directed persistence, goal-directed attention and focus, and metacognition a little later. As a review though, let's talk about how our foundation is built upon our executive functions. Remember, our executive functions are our background players. They're often overlooked, but a key driving force in how we interact with our environment every moment of every day. So let's take a step back for a moment and take a look at these 6 executive function skills. If you were not able to attend our training back in May, I encourage you to look back at the Parent Resource Center's YouTube page where we talk more about the supporting executive functions at home. So here we have metacognition, working memory, goal-directed persistence, goal-directed attention and focus, self-control, cognitive flexibility, and shift. Executive function skills begin to develop when our children are very young, and they can continue developing into their 20s. So the good news is that we can teach and develop these skills for many years. Metacognition is our ability to analyze, understand, and monitor one's own thinking and learning. Working memory is our ability to store, retrieve, and use information for a task, such as relating one idea to another. Goal-directed persistence is the ability to initiate tasks, plan and organize time and materials, solve problems, sustain effort, and follow through. Our goal-directed attention and focus is our ability to filter out those distractions and sustain concentration in order to be able to think, listen, or watch with interest. Self-control. Self-control is the ability to inhibit and regulate our emotional and behavioral responses and read and respond to social situations. Our self-control is really embedded all throughout what we do on a daily basis. And cognitive flexibility and shift. That's our ability to take perspectives and make connections, being able to think flexibly and adapt to change and adjust to the unexpected. If you have your participant guide in front of you, our executive functions, these slides on our participant guide are on page 1 of our participant guide, so please feel free to follow along and take notes. So here we have our metacognition. Here it is. Here it's defined. Metacognition could look like when your student has homework in all their core classes and they need to prioritize which assignments need to be completed first and developing a plan for completing their assignments. Working memory, an example of working memory could be holding a person's address in mind while listening to the instructions about how to get to that person's house. Goal-directed persistence is being able to set reasonable goals and attainable goals. That goal-directed attention and focus is tuning out distractions while working. Self-control is the coping tools we use to manage our stress or our big emotions or any of those worrisome feelings we may be having. and cognitive flexibility and shift. That's being able for getting ready to have breakfast in the morning or my coffee in the morning and there's no milk. So how am I going to be flexible about that? How am I going to shift when there's something that I want that's not there? We know our executive functions do not work in isolation, and they are often collaborating in order to drive our actions in real life. Today, we're going to discuss how metacognition, goal-directed attention and focus, and goal-directed persistence play a role in self-monitoring and independence. But first, let's get started with talking about prompting. Prompting. Prompts are used to increase the likelihood that a student will respond to something in their environment. So again, if you're following along on your participant guide, this can be found on page 1 if you want to take notes on prompting and the importance of it. So a prompt is an instruction. It can be a gesture or a demonstration that we do to increase the likelihood that our student will give a correct response. Prompts are used to teach new behaviors and skills. Prompting does have many advantages. Prompting can help to support correct responding and even sometimes decrease the frustration by providing that cue toward the correct response. Think back to your own experience when you learned something new or maybe even something that was challenging for you. When our student responds correctly, it is likely much more reinforcing than responding incorrectly. Prompting is really important when we're learning a new skill. So when will we use this prompt? It's going to be really important that when we look at our prompt, that we want to be able to think about that new behavior or skills or that new skill. Prompts and reinforcement are always high when learning a new skill. Prompting can occur with or after an instruction, depending on the student. We want to prompt only when necessary to prevent any prompt dependency, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So teaching the skill to maybe, let's say, put the backpack away when coming in from school. The caregiver can model what to do with the backpack upon the student entering their environment. Modeling can also occur at other times to practice the skill. The caregiver could model by taking the backpack, going to the appropriate place to store the backpack, and hanging it up. This would be a modeling prompt. If the student does not require a modeling prompt, the prompt may instead be something like a gesture, such as pointing towards the location to hang up the backpack. We'll talk more about this and other types of prompts as well. So here's our prompting process. This is a great visual of what this process looks like. You can also find a copy of it on page 2 of your participant guide if you're taking those notes about prompting and the prompting process and upcoming prompting levels that we'll be talking about. So here's a visual of our process. This prompting process starts with the instruction. Depending on the student's ability, the prompt may be given along with the instruction. It may be that the caregiver waits a moment after giving the instruction to allow the student time to process what was asked. When the student responds, their response will either be correct or incorrect. If the response is correct, the caregiver should provide reinforcement. For example, pairing a high five with, "Way to go, you hung your backpack in just the right spot." If the response is incorrect, the caregiver can help their student make the correction. For example, "Oops, that's not where the backpack goes. It doesn't go on the floor, it goes here." And then I can point to the area where the backpack should go. So we give that instruction. We allow time for that instruction to process, so we can either prompt immediately if it's a new skill, or we may want to provide that wait time for our student to process what they heard. And then that response happens, and then there's either that reinforcement that's provided, or we give them that correction and we go back to that instruction again. So types of prompts. And we just talked about briefly about some examples of prompting. So let's take a look at each one of these prompts. You can have a physical prompt, which is physically guiding the student to perform a skill. For example, like in this picture, holding a student's hand while teaching them how to make a sandwich, or holding a student's hand to teach them how to scrub a pan or a pot while washing dishes. A model prompt, when another individual demonstrates the desired skill. For example, the caregiver holds the sponge and demonstrates how to move the hand back and forth to scrub the pan, and then the student does it. It can also be a gestural prompt, using gestures such as pointing to guide the student to the correct response. An example of that could be pointing to the soap and to the sponge and then to the pan. A positional prompt can be placing materials in a location or a sequence that supports the completion of an activity or a response. An example of that could be leaving the soap and the sponge in the pan on the counter that needs to be washed. We can always use visual prompts as well, visuals such as pictures or symbols, and even text that can assist a student to respond correctly. For example, showing the student an image of someone scrubbing a pan. And finally, verbal. Using a spoken language or a cue to guide the student to perform the skill. For example, telling the student to hold the sponge and move their hand back and forth while working on the pan to help clean the pan. So here's another visual of our prompts and how we level our prompts. So our prompts can be classified from most intrusive to least intrusive. Our most intrusive prompts would be a full physical, because we will maybe be putting using hand over hand in order to teach our learners a task or a skill. Our least intrusive is being able to use our verbals. We do know that verbal prompts, although it is the least intrusive, sometimes it's the hardest to fade. So we also want to think about those verbals and how many verbals we're providing to our student. So you do not have to go through each type of prompt when teaching a skill, especially teaching a new skill. Each of our students is an individual with unique needs, and prompting levels will vary for them. In certain cases, you may need to start with the most involved and most intrusive prompt, which is that full physical. And in other cases, a least intrusive level of prompting may be needed, such as modeling or utilizing a visual or even utilizing that verbal prompt. We are going to provide you in the next slides about an example of mopping the floor to be able to understand the various levels of prompting when teaching a new skill of being able to mop the floor. Keep in mind that this is an example and that each individual is unique when it comes to these prompting levels. So here's the physical prompt. Remember that physical prompt is when we're physically guiding the student to perform a skill. It can be that full physical or it can be that partial physical. Take a look at the images on the slide. In the top picture, the caregiver is holding one of the student's hands that has the pencil in it. The caregiver is guiding the student to write with a full physical prompt. The caregiver is also holding the other hand of the student in order to assist the student to learn about placement of their other hand while they're engaging in this writing task. The bottom image shows the caregiver touching the elbow of the student as they hold the pencil. This partial physical touch on the elbow just prompts the student to begin writing without being as intrusive as holding the hand that has the pencil in it. Another example of the full and partial physical prompting could be our example that we're going to go through of mopping. If the caregiver were to use a full physical prompt, this could look like the caregiver holding the mop over the top of both of the student's hands and moving the mop across the floor in a specific way. If the caregiver were to use a partial physical prompt, the caregiver might just tap the student's elbows, alternating between the right and the left elbow to prompt the student to move the mop across the floor in a specific way. Maybe it's back and forth, or maybe it's up and down. Our modeling prompt. This is when another individual demonstrates the desired skill. Modeling is used when the caregiver shows the student how to do a task and the learner observes. The learner then completes the task after observing the caregiver. So back to our mopping example, the caregiver would show the student how to move the mop back and forth on the floor and then allow the student the opportunity to practice and demonstrate that same mopping movement and motion. Our gestural prompt, using gestures such as pointing to guide the student to the correct response. In the image on the left of the slide, the caregiver is pointing to a word on the page of the book. The student is being prompted using a gesture to read the word. The caregiver in the image in the center of this slide is prompting our student to go get his laundry out of the washer because she wants to do her load of laundry next. For our mopping example, the caregiver would move their hand in a mopping motion back and forth to provide a gestural prompt for their student in engaging in that mopping task. So I'm going to ask us to think about a few of these prompts that we just talked about. And we want to think about this next question. And I want you to use your agree or disagree button to indicate or to answer whether or not the following statement is true. Well, I mean, whether the following statement you agree with or you disagree with. A modeling prompt is the most intrusive prompt on the hierarchy. And I'm going to be able to see next to your name your agree and your disagrees, depending on what you think of this question. A modeling prompt is the most intrusive prompt on the hierarchy. Okay, I see some coming back with some answers. Nice. I'm seeing some answers come through. Fantastic. So when we think about our levels of prompting, our physical prompt is the most intrusive prompt on the hierarchy. A modeling prompt is about the third prompt in the hierarchy after that full physical and partial physical prompts. All right, let's see. Let's do an agree or disagree. Let's do another one. So we're going to use that agree or disagree button again to answer, indicate whether or not the statement is you agree with or you disagree with. A physical prompt is always needed in the beginning when teaching a new skill. What do we think about that answer? All right, I'm seeing some disagrees come through. Yep. All right, I'm seeing some answers coming through. Yep, I'm seeing some more answers coming through as well. Let's see. All right, let's take a look at this. Final answers, agree or disagree. I'm going to clear my answer off. So we're going to say disagree. Prompting levels vary for each individual, which is something we really want to be able to remember. A caregiver can start at any part of the hierarchy that fits where their learner is in that moment in time and with that task. So we can start anywhere within that hierarchy. It does not always need to be that physical prompt. All right, let's do one more. keeping us awake this morning. All right, let's indicate or answer whether you agree or disagree. An advantage of prompting is that it can decrease frustration when learning a new skill. Do we agree? I'm gonna open up my agree and disagree button. What are we thinking? I'm seeing some answers coming through right now. I'm seeing lots of green. I love it. Absolutely. There are several advantages when using prompts. Prompting not only can decrease frustration, it can also increase the connection between instruction and the correct response, which helps with learning. So we're going to agree with this one. An increase in reinforcement can occur with correct responding. Think about the last time you learned something new and maybe the different prompts that maybe you were given, and then how you felt once you did it or once you got it. Same for our students as well. All right, moving on to some more prompts. Okay, a positional prompt is being able to place materials in a location or sequence that supports the completion of an activity or a response. So in the example that you see on your slide, the caregiver is asking the student, which one of these items is something you wear? Notice that the hat is placed closer to the student, giving the student a positional prompt to choose the hat. If we go back to our mopping example, as we're mopping that floor, as a chore that might be something that the caregiver maybe places the mopping supplies in the location that's to be mopped. Therefore, providing a positional prompt for the student to engage in that task of mopping. All right, our visual prompts. Our visual prompts are being able to use visuals such as pictures or symbols and even text, as you see on the screen, to assist students to respond correctly. Again, each of our learners are different and they are unique. So some will need to have those visuals, those pictures, and some will just need the text written out for them. Visual schedules, such as the example in the middle of the slide, prompts the student to complete a series of expectations. Notice on the right side of the screen, this visual helps the student to remember naming the parts of a paragraph. The student can then use the visual to write a paragraph that contains each of the parts. A visual prompt of our mopping example could contain images of the items needed to be gathered in order to mop. So I could show my learner pictures of the items that they need. A further visual could even be included to show the steps of how to mop the floor. And now our verbal prompt. Our verbal prompt is when we use language, a language cue to guide the student to perform the skill. Verbal prompts should be kept to a minimum so as not to overwhelm the student. We definitely want to think about our learner and their needs and how much verbal we can or cannot use with them. And maybe some tips with some verbal prompts would be, if it's appropriate, maybe you and the learner will be in the same proximity. Being able to use proximity is really important. When I want to say something to my learner, I definitely want to be in proximity to them and try not to yell from one room to the other. Maybe even seeing if the student is looking at the caregiver, if that is a skill that that student has and if it's appropriate. And then being mindful of how many steps are needed in order to follow the direction. So let's continue thinking about our mopping the floor example. The caregiver can verbally prompt the student with the steps to mopping the floor. Hey, don't remember, go get your supplies for the mopping, get the bucket, remember how to move the mop to the right and to the left, so that we can then verbally give the prompting for that skill to happen. So what I'd like to be able to do is we're going to switch screens now and we're going to pull up a video. And in this video, you are going to be able to see one of our colleagues with her son modeling for us 4 different types of prompts. You're going to see an example of a full physical, a partial physical, a gestural, and a modeling prompt.
Let's say you want your child to put their dishes in the sink. You give the instruction, put in the sink, and they don't respond.
Put it in the sink.
Give the instruction again, put in the sink, and provide a full physical prompt from behind to complete the response.
Put it in the sink. There we go.
Next, you can fade this to a partial physical prompt.
Put it in the sink.
As I get the hang of it, another option is to gesture, which is less intrusive. Put in the sink and point to the sink.
Put your plate in the sink.
If your child can imitate well, a model prompt can be helpful too. Put in the sink and you do it yourself and they copy.
Put it in the sink.
Now, what if you're working on
Thank you, Lori, for sharing that video with us. So in this video, it was nice to see the student in action and being able to go through those different level of prompts, which are really important. And now keeping in mind that the student is a young child, however, these prompting methods would look the same for any age student. I have a middle schooler and a high schooler, and this prompting level are things that I still continue to use depending on where my own student is with the skill. I find that I do a lot of gesturals. Literally just last night, my kids made some cupcakes and they cleaned everything up and kind of forgot to put away some of the dishes from making those cupcakes. And I used just a gestural. They were in the kitchen with me and I just used a gestural and then I walked out of the kitchen. So being able to think about what are these prompts that you were using? What do they look like? What do they sound like? So we thought this video was fantastic to be able to share, and thinking about that we can use these different levels depending on the needs of where our students are. Which then takes us into that moment of thinking back to these prompts and which ones or where would they be with your student. We definitely want to remember that each learner is unique and we want to be sure that we're using that least intrusive prompt as possible. So taking a look at our pictures. In our first picture, there is that most intrusive prompt, which is that full physical. Being able to teach a very new skill, showing maybe where that peanut butter goes, where that maybe if that's the peanut butter jelly sandwich, which absolutely looks delicious right now, and using that full physical. Our middle picture of the adult and the child brushing their teeth. And that adult caregiver showing the child maybe how to move that toothbrush back and forth. That's that modeling. And then that verbal, that a caregiver and then that student being in proximity of each other, being able to make eye contact. Again, if eye contact is something that the child can do. So being able to really be present with that verbal and having that communication. So remembering those different levels of prompts for your learner. So we also want to talk about prompt dependence. Prompt dependence is when your student needs a prompt to do something that they already have mastered. They already know how to do it, but they're used to us giving them a prompt. Prompt dependency is when the student has already mastered a skill or an activity, and they are not independent with initiating it without the caregiver's prompt. So we also want to be aware of prompt dependency. I know at home I had fallen into this many times with my own learners, and in my head I'm saying, but I know they know how to do this. So I kind of stop and say, okay, maybe we have a little bit of prompt dependency going on here. And then I have to think about prompt fading. So if you're still following along in your participant guide, this can be found on page 3 if you are following along and want to take notes. So prompt fading. When we engage in prompt fading, we are planning for the reduction and removal of those prompts that have been provided. Having a plan for fading the prompts helps to lead your student towards independence. So even taking this picture, the letter A. That letter A, I'm going to have my student trace over top to bottom and across. And then I slowly start to fade the picture that they see. And then they, at the end of this visual, they are seeing that it's still the letter A, but it's not as bold as it was at the very beginning. So being able to slowly fade our prompts is really, really important for our learners. All right, so what is this fading? It again is gradually increasing independence by moving from that most to that least. So for example, if maybe the caregiver is using a positional prompt by putting a laundry basket of folded clothes outside their student's bedroom door. To begin fading this prompt, the caregiver may instead write a note and place it on the kitchen counter, asking their student to put away their clean clothes. So removal of that prompt so that the student responds independently. We definitely want to fade our prompts as soon as possible, again, dependent on that learner. And all prompted responses should be attempted again with a least intrusive prompt. And we definitely want to fade systematically. When you're at the very least end of that prompting hierarchy over where the verbal is, the number of verbal prompts given can also be faded. I often say in my own home here, I say, I seem to be saying that over and over again. Well, then that's my cue. If I'm hearing myself over and over again, that's my cue to reduce the verbals or maybe even utilize a lesser prompt. We know that our student is moving in the direction of being independent when prompt fading is occurring successfully and the student starts to show signs of self-monitoring. We're going to talk about self-monitoring in the next slides, but first I want to do another poll with everybody. We have talked a lot about the various levels of prompting. We've now just talked about prompt fading. So I want to know, where are you in this journey? We're going to put a poll up for number 1, you're ready to do this. Number 2, I'm still processing this information. And number 3, I'm not sure yet where I am. All right, we're going to get this poll on our screen while you are thinking about this. Where do you think you may be in this process? Are you 1, ready to do this? Are you 2, still processing? Or 3, maybe you're not sure yet. So take a look at those visuals, giving you a moment to think about where you are. And we're going to have that poll come on up. There it is. All right. Am I ready to do this? I'm still processing. All right, I'm going to say, okay. Oh, look at us. We're getting through. Look at us. Oh, we're going in between number 1 and 2. I'm ready to do this, and I'm still processing. And some of us may not even be sure yet. All right, let's see what our total responses are. Look at us, 1 and 2, and coming up behind is 3. So it's really important that we, in this journey, no judgment, we are in this behavior journey because that's exactly what it is. We talked about at the beginning of the presentation, and really every presentation that we've done, about how developing these skills in our learners takes time. It definitely takes a positive approach and consistency. And if you're still processing or you're not sure, that's okay. If you're ready to do this, let's make it happen. And let's just take on one little thing at a time. Let's not do everything at once. Think about where you are in this journey and where you want to continue this process. Thank you so much for that poll, and thanks everybody for participating. All right, moving on to even some better stuff now too. We're going to talk about self-monitoring. So in your participant guide, you should be able to find this information on page 3 to continue jotting down your thoughts and taking any notes that are connecting with you. So the executive function skills of metacognition, goal-directed persistence, and goal-directed attention and focus come into play with the ability to self-monitor. We're going to specifically address these executive function skills further in the presentation, but first, let's talk about the advantages of being able to self-monitor. All right, in our home settings, self-monitoring can offer a lot of different advantages. Self-monitoring requires that the student be an active participant in measuring and evaluating their behaviors. In order to accurately self-evaluate behavior, the student must first learn the caregiver's behavioral expectations. The ability of a student to understand and internalize the behavioral expectations of others can continue to support the development of those social skills. Measuring and evaluating behaviors can be as simple as using a brief checklist to follow up or to follow up in a discussion regarding the student's use of expected behavior. The caregiver and the student may discuss successes and areas of need together, or the student may share their progress with the parent. We always want to make sure that we are involving our student in our interventions. We want to talk to them about what we're doing. We want them to have a voice. We want to know where they are in relation to what it is that we're trying to teach them. Student voice is always very important to anything we do with our students. All right, so components of self-monitoring. There are 2. It is measurement and evaluation. Measurement is the student measures and records their behavior. Evaluation is the student compares their recorded behavior to a predetermined standard. So keeping in mind that many of our students may need prompts to self-monitor in the beginning of this process. The caregiver can use the prompt hierarchy to establish which level of prompting is needed to facilitate their learning. So building those self-monitoring skills means working on the executive function skills of metacognition, goal-directed persistence, and goal-directed attention and focus. In order for the learner to measure their own behavior, they need to be aware of the target behavior or the skill. Goal-directed persistence and metacognition are needed in order to have an awareness of one's own behavior. Additionally, the learner will need to compare their behavior to the target behavior or skill and evaluate it. This involves metacognition and goal-directed persistence. Throughout the process, the learner will need to maintain attention and follow through with the task of monitoring themselves, which involves, again, that goal-directed attention and focus. Like we were saying earlier, our executive function skills don't happen in isolation. They all are working back there together. So metacognition, we had talked about, is our ability to analyze and understand and monitor one's own learning and thinking. Activities such as planning how to approach a given learning task or a challenging situation and monitoring one's own learning of information are examples of metacognition. Evaluating progress towards the completion of a task or making the choice of an expected behavior instead of an unexpected behavior are also metacognitive in nature. Metacognition is the ability to think about one's own thinking and learning. It provides your student with the opportunity to think about their ability, their competency on a task, starting for them to think about control over the outcomes of a situation. Metacognition allows us to think about our failures and our successes, which enables us to evaluate our personal outcomes, and also being able to understand the benefit of strategies and how they can help us. So that goal-directed persistence we've talked about is being able to start tasks, plan and manage time. So an example of that would be the ability to plan maybe an event that's coming up, a party, let's say, and those time and materials and being able to follow through and problem solve, because then I'm planning a party and the pandemic hit. Then I need to think about maybe a backup plan. I may have to be flexible in my thinking about the number of people or where or when. So goal-directed persistence can be very important as well, because not all tasks are equal in nature. When I'm at home and I have my chore to do of doing my laundry or baking a batch of amazingly, deliciously chocolatey chip cookies, chances are I'm going to want to do the fun thing of baking the cookies, because the laundry is not necessarily something that is going to sustain my effort. So I know I clearly have that goal-directed persistence skill, but again, not all tasks are completely equal. And, you know, I would choose better to make those amazing cookies than I do want to do that laundry. So now let's think about your student. When we're asking them to complete academics or doing their chores or completing activities, are there ones that you can think of that get done quickly and efficiently? Are there ones that require additional support or maybe don't get done at all? Well, this may be a goal-directed persistence need. Again, not all tasks are equal. For tasks that perhaps require more effort or are new to your student, there may be a need for those additional supports. Within goal-directed persistence, there's even more little sub-skills or subtasks that can be worked on individually. Goal-directed persistence can be broken down into 4 areas where we're goal setting, we're planning and strategizing, we have time management, and task initiation. A student may be able to identify what they want, which is their goal, but they may need support in identifying how to get to that goal through planning, time management, or task initiation. Again, I like that we are going to pull the student in for the student voice and what they want to identify as their goal. Which leads us into that goal-directed attention and focus, being able to filter out those distractions and sustain attention in order to think, listen, or watch. Activities which goal-directed attention and focus are needed could be getting ready to begin the day in the morning, or what does the end of the day routine look like? What about planning dinner, or how do I plan my homework? Maybe writing a paper or those long-term projects, studying for tests, or even managing tasks that require a great amount of effort. As we talked about earlier, building these self-monitoring skills means working on the executive function skills of our metacognition, our goal-directed persistence, and our goal-directed attention and focus. We are now going to go through some slides that provide examples of strategies that support self-monitoring. We have made note that our specific executive function skills within each of these strategies for support. All right, so as we talked about earlier, self-monitoring is twofold. It's the ability to measure one's own behavior and the ability to evaluate one's own behavior. Measurement is when our student measures and records their behavior. So let's talk about some tools that can be used for that measurement by the student. For some students, just having the strategy in front of them will be enough for self-monitoring. Other students may need some follow-through and encouragement as they learn to use the tool or strategy. It's important to remember to acknowledge when your student demonstrates their use of a strategy, either with the caregiver's help or independently. We want to be very vocal in supporting them and letting them know what they're doing and how it's supporting their independence, how it's supporting their self-monitoring. So we can do this by using checklists. That's a strategy that can build goal-directed persistence and goal-directed attention and focus. Checklists can be used to evaluate how things went, such as, did my behavior match the expectation? Has there been progress, maybe from yesterday, this week, or last month? How do I feel about my behavior? In the middle, journals. Journals can be used as a strategy to help support metacognition and goal-directed persistence, as you see in the visual in the middle of your slide. The use of a journal could include planning, monitoring, and evaluating academic and behavioral expectations. Journaling allows the student to ask themselves, what do I need to do? How am I doing? And how did it go? Journals can also be used to build on those metacognition and goal-directed persistence strategies to come up with a change in a plan if it didn't meet the expectations that were set. On the right of your screen is what we call a task analysis. It's also sometimes called a schedule within a schedule. Instead of saying, put a load of laundry in, the student can follow a step-by-step task analysis for completing it. As you can see here, there are 8 steps. Considering the number of steps when creating a task analysis based on the individual learner's needs. A visual schedule, which you see on the left, is also a strategy that can be used to keep the student focused on a series of tasks that need to be completed. Visual schedules can help strengthen goal-directed attention and focus and goal-directed persistence skills by allowing the student to have a visual of what comes next. So on the visual on the left, looks like the first expectation was completed because we see done. The next expectation is to pick up toys. When the child engages in that expectation, they'll Velcro it back up and it'll say done. We can also use tallies to help support measuring where the student is in meeting the expectation. A basic chart could be set up for the student to mark tallies to monitor their behavior. On the right of your slide, you will see a weekly reflection document where the student is marking tallies for how many times they played video games, did a chore, played outside, and did homework. This is a great way for the student to self-monitor their use of time. It's a great visual for our kids because then they can see where they spent most of their time. And a lot of times when I use these strategies at home with my students, the information is right there in front of them. I don't have to reiterate a situation such as, yep, you played, look at all that time you played on your video games, as opposed to that time you spent doing homework, because the visual says it all for them. Timers can also be used to set breaks and establish start time or end time. A visual timer, such as the one with the red, allows the student to see the actual passage of those minutes and those seconds, whereas that sand timer is a nice, calm way to watch the passage of time as well. Another way to self-monitor is having the steps written out or in pictures what tasks need to be done. This is another example of a task analysis or a schedule within a schedule. On the right side of the screen, there's a list of steps needed to complete to take out the garbage. The student can cross off each step as they complete each goal. Through the use of these visuals that we're taking a look at, it establishes the expectation from the caregiver, and it allows it broken down so that the student can engage in the task. So when we take a look at some other strategies for executive functions and self-monitoring, on the left side is a Post-it note with your start time and end time. And this is a strategy that supports following directions so that the student can see when something ends. I know I have a student who here at home who enjoys seeing the end time of work and homework. We can start without a problem as long as my student is able to see that there is an end, because sometimes it doesn't feel like there's ever an end. So the goal is the student is motivated to initiate the task because they know when that end time will be. Calendars, such as the one on the right, can be used not only to plan, which is our goal-directed persistence and goal-directed attention, but to evaluate one's self on whether or not they met a deadline or a timeline, such as within metacognition. For example, a student could use the calendar to count how many days for the week or month they turned in their assignments or turned in their assignments on time. All right, as we continue, on the left is a self-monitoring homework schedule for breaks. In this case, our student is working towards knowing when it is time to take a break, how to take the break, and how to return to their homework. So it looks like I need a break. I'm going to set my timer for 3 minutes. When the timer goes off, I'll come back to my work, and then I can take a break again if I need to. On the right side is a checklist for going on a trip. So this is something that I started with my own learners at home. I would give them the number of each item to pack on the checklist and have them put it in the suitcase. Eventually, my son started to come home. Eventually, my son came to ask me for the packing checklist. So at first I provided it, then they came and asked for it, and then eventually my students started making his own checklist. And just recently, with going off for a weekend for a tournament, I was really excited because he created his own checklist. He had all of his information there of what it was that he needed to bring with him for the weekend. So that was really nice to see. It was really nice to see the evolution of teaching them the skill, him taking over the skill, and him utilizing it independently and self-monitoring where he was and what it was that he needed to pack for his weekend away for a baseball tournament. All right, so some more executive functions and self-monitoring strategies. Another way to support this process is by color coding, which you can see on the left of your screen. This is how a specific student color codes their notebooks for school. This is a way for this specific learner to know which book to pull out of the backpack at home or at school in order to be ready for class. On the right side of your screen is an example of how a student organizes their time after school. This student's participation in the process of creating the schedule was very important to allowing them to have a voice for how they wanted to schedule their evening. My expectations look different than what my student put together on the right side of this screen. I would prefer my student came in, got all their homework done, got all their chores done, and then rested. But my student said to me, but after school, I'm tired. I just want to come home. Can I just have a snack? Can I just take a break? And that really resonated with me. And I knew my student needed to have a voice in how his evening was going to be planned out. So this is something that we put together as well, with him taking the lead of what this was going to look like and sound like. So when we talk about self-monitoring, we want to remember that measurement piece and that evaluation piece with self-monitoring. So let's say you give your student a daily planner checklist like you see here. First, you want to be able to teach how to use the checklist. We want to be able to create a self-monitoring tool for evaluation. We want to absolutely clarify the expectations, make sure we're both on the same page, and identify the date to review progress. Evaluation includes a review of the self-monitoring tool. An example of a tool that allows the student to review their performance, I'm going to show you next. So here we have a self-evaluation tool that's at the top, which is that rating scale that lets the student determine what they were doing and how they did. The student can then count the frequency of each of the ratings, or yes or no's, daily for a week. The student can present the information to the caregiver. They can engage in a positive conversation with feedback about how the student did. I, as the caregiver, may give feedback. The student may also give feedback on themselves. And again, we don't want to forget that positive reinforcement for a job well done. And for more information about positive reinforcement with your student, you can always go back to our earlier training given in December, where we talked about all behavior happens for a reason. And we talked about in January, our strategies for increasing replacement behaviors. And we embedded reinforcement into both that December and January training that can be found on the Parent Resource YouTube channel. Okay, so here's another example of our chore chart and our measurement. First, again, we want to be able to teach how to use the chore chart. We want to create a self-monitoring tool to evaluate, and we want to, again, clarify the expectations and identify when to review progress. The evaluation will need to occur so it can be determined if the student did what they needed to do. So let's take a look at what a self-monitoring tool could look like for the student after they engage in doing their checkoff, this visual checkoff list, and let's see how they did. So this self-evaluation tool is something that the student can use to determine what they needed to do daily. The student can then circle the correct image to describe how they did. The student can present this information to the caregiver, perhaps using a tool similar to the one here. Again, we want to engage in a conversation about, okay, they're evaluating themselves. How did I do? I did it. I did some of it. I didn't do it yet. Again, we want them to engage in self-monitoring. It may not always be perfect. We want them to engage in that evaluation piece, and we want to provide them with reinforcement. We want them to hear and know that what they're doing is expected. All right, so let's do another poll. Let's think about our executive function skills that we've talked about. Which executive function skill do you think you would like to focus on with your student as you continue to work towards independence? We have our 3 different possibilities that we were talking about. We have our first one, number 1, is goal-directed persistence. We have our number 2, which is metacognition. And we have number 3, goal-directed attention and focus. So, oh, perfect. There's our poll. So which executive function skill would you like to focus on with your student as you continue to this journey towards independence? We don't want to work on all of them at once. We want to see if maybe there's a specific target that you're thinking about right now. I'm seeing those responses coming through. I think I'm going to actually identify one as well that we're working on over here in my home. Oh, I'm seeing them come through. All right. We've got our goal-directed persistence, number 1, our metacognition, and number 3, goal-directed attention and focus. Seeing those responses come through, and when our responses are done coming in, there we go. We can see our total of responses. We have the majority of us looking at that goal-directed persistence. Then running up in number 2 is our goal-directed attention and focus. And finally, rounding us out is metacognition. So this is a great way for you to be able to stop and think about where you want to put that time and energy, and utilizing these strategies and these resources to be able to allow you and your student the time to focus on one of these executive function skills. Thank you guys. Thanks everybody for participating. And remember to always refer back to those strategies that are embedded within this presentation. All right, here we are. We are at independence, our ultimate goal. It's important to make sure that our expectations match our students' abilities. Independence looks different for each of our learners. I know we mentioned that executive function skills are not fully developed until our mid-20s, so we want to be able to remember that and keep that information in mind throughout this journey. So when we talk about maximizing independence, please refer back to your participant guide on page 4 if you're following along. Our journey to creating independence with our students. We have explored prompting. We've talked about our need for prompt fading, our executive function strategies, and self-evaluation strategies. All right, so what's next? Let's talk about how we as caregivers can tie the last of the pieces together to empower independence. So, beginning this prompt, this begins with that prompt fading and self-monitoring. This does not mean that the verbal instructions such as it's time for dinner or it's homework time stop. Independence looks different for each of our individuals. We may provide a visual schedule or that checklist for our student to follow through on our expectations. We may utilize different systems of reinforcements for our student, and that is okay. Where our learners are and what they need are unique to them. So being able to allow any system in place is fine. We want to be able to be sure to follow up with our students' demonstration of independent tasks with reinforcements. You know, we want to be able to let them know and hear, way to go this morning. That was so cool how you put the toys away so quickly, or coming in, you put that backpack away. We want to encourage that independence. And we also want to empower independence. We want to be able to continue to celebrate those approximations, or when the student is getting it kind of right, but not quite there yet. We incorporate practicing, and we want to be able to take time to pause and evaluate where our student is with independence. So when we take a look at independence, when my students were learning to load the dishwasher, they didn't exactly put the dish in the correct spot, but that was okay. It was an approximate. They got the dish in the dishwasher, and we started with that. We started with those approximations. And celebrating those approximations. Celebrating approximations are so important. When my child was learning to load the dishwasher, just putting the dish in the bottom rack was a total celebration. It was a big high five. And also, personally, I needed to be able to be okay with the dish not going in perfectly. And I really made sure to not rearrange what my child did, because that would have felt defeating to my child. So the plate went in crooked, I left it crooked, because I wanted to gain their confidence. I wanted them to gain their excitement, their own confidence about being able to do a skill. So as caregivers, we want to be able to support and celebrate those approximations. Of course, we do want to get our students to get it right the first time, but in the beginning, we need to accept those approximations. So be sure to acknowledge these independent steps that they're taking. They may be small and they may be teeny, but how powerful it is. Make the experience as positive as possible, which is really important for them as they learn. Providing opportunities for practice. We want those opportunities to practice. This may require some thought ahead of time in order to plan those practice opportunities. For example, planning ahead for making a recipe, or doing laundry, or going outside and doing some sort of yard work in the community, being able to care for pets. We want to provide those opportunities for them to practice. And again, we want to be able to kind of pause and evaluate. It's natural for us as a caregiver to want to step in and maybe sometimes do it for our child, or to assist them all the time. So being able to, time is sometimes a factor that impacts us and our need to step in. When we do this, our student can learn to wait to respond, and wait for us to step in. Giving ourselves a time frame before stepping in helps. Giving our student a time frame to have something started or completed is also really important. If we're seeing that a pattern that indicates a lack of or a decrease in independence, it may be to evaluate expectations as well as the caregiver and student's behavior. So here's our recipe for that student independence. We want to celebrate those approximations by pausing and evaluating, and then the caregivers putting, emphasis on finishing touches to maximize that student independence at home. It is like a recipe. It is working our way towards that independence. It is that behavior journey. So finally, as we want to reflect on our take-home message, behaviors or communication, prompting leads into prompt fading, which leads us towards self-monitoring, and then executive functions, and finally our independence. We don't want to forget about independence. Prompting helps our students to increase the likelihood that students will give correct responses. Prompts are used to teach new behaviors and skills, and consideration should be given to fading those prompts. Self-monitoring skills are also lead to independence. When a student is able to self-monitor, they are able to notice their behavior and then make an objective and accurate recording of that behavior in order to evaluate Teaching executive function skills also leads students down the path towards independence. And finally, by celebrating those approximations, providing opportunities to practice, feeling okay with pausing and evaluating, and then the caregiver being able to facilitate the process of independence. Finally, we want to take a moment for you to do a personal self-reflection of your journey and the wishes you have moving forward. What are the 3 wishes for your child? What are 3 wishes for yourself? And what are 3 wishes for your family? This is a personal reflection. We want you to feel free to add your personal reflection into your participant guide on page 5 as you think and you continue to process all these strategies and all this information. And again, we really want to reach out and say thank you to each of you for attending and taking on this behavior journey in partnership with those around you. Thank you to the Parent Resource Center. This has been a great journey this year, and it has been a privilege for us at Behavior Intervention Services to spend this time with all of you, and we look forward to our collaboration. I know that we will be opening up the chat box for any questions you all may have and any comments as well that you would like to make.
So ladies, thank you so much. As you can see, I have opened up the chat box, so go ahead and type your questions.
Janine, I just wanted to know if you might be able just to share real quickly if parents have questions and would like to talk with the behavior intervention teacher, perhaps at their school, how might they go about that?
That's a great question. Thank you. We do have behavior intervention teachers. We do have them supporting our schools throughout the district. So I would reach out to the administrator in the building and have a conversation with them. And, you know, sometimes some of these questions are things that we want to be able to work together as a team. Like we've mentioned prior, this behavior journey is not something that we can do alone, and sometimes it takes a lot of us to kind of come together to talk. So they are more than welcome to reach out to their administrator at their school or their contact person.
Yeah, thanks so much, Janine. So our first question, how do you help teach flexibility? For example, when expectations need to change?
Oftentimes, teaching flexibility, especially when expectations need to change, can sometimes be hard on us as the caregiver as well as on our student. Often what I'll do is being able to let the student know, not completely what it is that needs to change, but sometimes I'll say, oh, you know what, this isn't working. I need to find out a different way for this to happen. What do you think we could do differently? And start to engage the child in part of that conversation. Expectations will change. Our expectations when our child may be younger to when our child may be older, those expectations do need to change. So priming them often is something that we can do to help allow them to know that this change is coming. Depending on your learner, being able to engage in that change and that flexibility step by step, so that we're not changing everything at once, but we may be changing one little piece of it at a time to get them towards that larger goal of what needs to change. Lori, any other thoughts from you as well?
The first thing that came to mind is exactly what you said with the priming, meaning, and I know Janine has talked about this in some of the prior trainings together, just giving your child an opportunity to know what is happening in the future, whether the future is in 15 minutes or an hour or 3 days from now, allows them to kind of process the change that's going to occur and prepare for it, and maybe even kind of practice and ask them how it might look or feel, so that they are able to be flexible in their thinking when it actually occurs.
Great, thank you, ladies. So our next question, how do you know when you should continue with a particular prompt versus deciding it's not working and try something else?
So taking a look at that prompt hierarchy, oftentimes what I'll do is kind of assess where my student is and what that skill may be. There are times where I've started with a prompt and I'm like, oh, nope, I need to go lower in the hierarchy because my student is giving me the information that, oh, I don't need that, I got this. So sometimes they'll guide us in that information. If we see that that skill is not occurring, then that's where we have to take a look at that prompt hierarchy. If the child is not engaging in that skill, that's when we start to say, okay, how do we need to maybe change this and maybe go with a more intrusive or that less intrusive prompt.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions for Janine or Lori?
And it looks like we have some of those, that theme coming up about flexibility, and we can definitely teach flexibility. We talked about that priming. Sometimes it's nice for our students to be able to have it in little pieces first before asking for that major change that may be occurring. Flexibility is a skill. It's one of those executive function skills that we definitely want our students to be able to be introduced to and learn. And being flexible allows for those changes to happen and us to be able to self-regulate through those changes, sometimes those big emotions that we have. So just breaking the skills down is going to be really important as well for our students when teaching flexibility.
I would agree. I would add to that, and this is a little bit off on a tangent, that for some of those students who do have that independence or are really close to independence, but still would want to access something more preferred than what we're asking them to do, sometimes by just removing the word no, you can't, like the word no, you can't do that right now, by saying, sure, first, let's do this. Then you can play outside on the swing in the backyard. And it's amazing by sometimes just removing that word no, it removes the barrier that your student hears of, I can't get what I want, to, oh, I can get it. It just might be, delayed. So that has been a kind of an easy little bit of a trick that we have found to be successful when working both with students in the school and personally with my own. So, yep, first, then, exactly, same thing. First, then, when, then actually is really nice too, because then it doesn't put like a demand, like first you have to do this. It depends on, how our students react. But even just, sure, when you finish, or, when all the clothes are cleaned off of your floor, then you can take your bike and ride off to Chipotle, which would be the conversation in my house. So, those are just, again, some simple tricks trying to remove that word no, because our students hear it quite a bit because they can't always do what they want to do at that moment. But by giving them that power to access what they want just a little bit later by saying sure, it kind of opens up their mind to hearing that it's an option.
And the last question is, so if we have to leave to go somewhere and she isn't ready to go when we talked about it, how best is it to approach it?
So again, what might be helpful is using that priming technique, letting her know ahead of time, because maybe that shifting, one of those executive function skills that can be really hard for our youngest, actually for all of our students, but really for our youngest ones, that shift is really hard for them. And it might be that they need some of those either gestural prompts, like pointing towards her shoes to get ready, and in addition, priming her, letting her know that that we're leaving in 10 minutes, using a timer. We're leaving in 5 minutes, letting her know that it's coming up. and that maybe you offering even that visual that Janine shared earlier of that schedule within a schedule about how to get ready, putting on your shoes, maybe laying them out for her, laying out those steps as part of that support might be helpful as well. You can even make it into a game, like the shoes are right outside her bedroom door, and then her coat, if it's in the winter, for let's say, the coat is at the top of the steps, and then towards the bottom of the steps you see the gloves. So you're also giving that visual for her as to what has to go on, but you can make it fun as well.
Okay, thank you, ladies, and everyone have a good afternoon.